Welcome to The Hype Within, exploring journeys of authentic leadership and growth. On the show, tech leaders will share their stories of developing their leadership skills and challenges they faced along the way. You'll learn about their approaches to self-reflection and personal growth, and how they've been able to build a foundation of authenticity that has propelled them to success. I'm your host, Hana Jacover, B2B marketing leader turned leadership and executive coach. Are you ready to get hyped up? Let's dive in. Hello, leaders. Welcome back to The Hype Within. I am here today with Kristina Wilson, and Kristina is a talent acquisition leader in the tech space, and she's currently at Open Sesame, where one of my very dear friends, Tracy Eiler, works and had actually connected us via Women in Revenue. So I'm really happy that I get to have Kristina on the show today because, like I said, we were connected via Tracy, and she joined us on a panel discussion for Women in Revenue that was all about breaking barriers and what barriers women have in excelling in the workplace. And she had some fantastic advice and insight. So I know that you're going to bring all of that and more here today. So welcome. Hello. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for this awesome opportunity. It's so great that Tracy, as brilliant and extraordinary as she is, brought us both together to share some insight on leadership, DI, recruiting, and all the good things. So I'm eager to have this conversation with you.
Me too. Why don't you share a little bit about your journey and your career and how you got to where you are? And I always like to have people weave in their leadership style into that if you can.
Absolutely. So my journey took some twists and turns, and I really like sharing that. I started off initially wanting to pursue a managerial career in health administration. So I started a career doing very comprehensive statistical reporting for state and federal for a nonprofit. So why did I end up in talent acquisition, you might ask? That was through my graduate program. I initially was going to get a generalized degree in business administration, took one HR course, fell in love, and then that just spiraled into this phenomenal 10 plus year career that I have in TA, specifically in recruiting. So I have worked both corporate agency as well as consulting for myself. And my big goal with any opportunity that I take on professionally is how do I really structure and customize processes to tailor to the goals of that organization? How do I find dynamic, extraordinary talent for these organizations and really ultimately build something that didn't exist before? I'm all about expansion. How I define myself as a leader is I believe that being authentic, a level of transparency, some true grounded integrity, a little bit of inspiration, and bringing your human experience into your managerial approach. We don't need to be managed by robots. We need to know that there's a human being with some compassion, some empathy, some understanding, and some awesome support to drive a team. So that's how I show up on a day-to-day basis. Not saying I'm perfect, but that's always the goal in sight.
Awesome. None of us are perfect. I have yet to meet a perfect human being. Even my child, who I'm like, you're so perfect. He's not perfect. Nobody's perfect, but we're all learning. And I think if you have goals and you have that like strategic vision, then you can just stay as close to alignment as possible. And
Absolutely.
perfection is not the goal. I think alignment to our true selves and our values and how we want to show up in this world is an impact is the goal. Okay, I'm curious, since you've worked agency in corporate for yourself, me too, by the way, like it's hard to
Good.
bounce between all of those, but what would you say out of those three, where have you found the most challenge?
I would say the most challenging was probably agency. So you don't get to completely immerse yourself into an org. So I don't have full understanding of culture, of personas, of the ideal candidate profile, and what is really needed to truly integrate and be successful in this team. And then, of course, beyond that, the organization. I have a very high level vantage point of this information. So at times there's that connect versus when you, of course, decide to be an employee at an org and you're also charged with recruiting for that organization, you know what shows up well because you live the day in the life for yourself as well.
Yes. Oh, I love that. It's that not knowing the whole story. Like you're not in
Absolutely.
the day to day. So you have to make some assumptions, and that sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Okay. So you had mentioned part of your goal is really thinking about aligning to company needs, obviously hiring great talent. If you are thinking about other leaders out there, thinking about their recruitment strategies, how do you balance that innovative strategy that's also aligned with those company needs?
Absolutely. So you need to understand your org. You need to know where they sit within the industry. You need to understand some of their short term as well as their long term strategies and objectives. You need to understand the vision and what critical roles help execute that vision. I think that understanding helps then lead process and helps you identify talent that aligns with those goals. I think the other thing that's really important is you have to understand the brand. Like every organization has an employment brand and how they show up and articulate themselves in the marketplace. You need to understand that because you need to find talent that aligns with said brand. So if this organization is very innovative, always cutting edge, then you need to identify talent that is not complacent and is always coming up with the next big audacious idea. And you need to understand also how things are measured, how things are analyzed at an organization so that you can have a true impact from a recruitment lens and really showcase that. You also need to understand how decisions are made, who makes those decisions, how quickly those decisions are made, how lean, how flexible an organization is, how organized a corporation is. You need to have a lot of working insight to all of those things in order to implement a really impactful, effective recruitment strategy. And you also need to know the span. Like you can't ignore the numbers. And I think a lot of times, specifically recruiters, very junior entry into their career, have an understanding of maybe the salary range, but have the conversation beyond that. What's the budget? Can you give me some insight to headcount planning? Can you provide me some insight to your department budget? How does this feed in today as well as your ability to move or stretch dollars tomorrow? So it's really being strategic with how you're executing like recruiting and strategy around people planning, honestly.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say for the leaders out there that are responsible for talent acquisition, but there's not a formal talent acquisition role in place? Because everything that you just mentioned is a lot to take on and ensure that individual who's responsible, right, has all of that on top of their job, right? And then they're also looking for that talent. And then what if one of those key pieces is missing? So I guess what would you recommend for those kinds of leaders where they don't have that full support of a talent acquisition role?
Ooh, then you have to go back into education mode. You need to look at some institutions, some associations that's going to foster an opportunity for you to learn and get some real quick crash course into things like TA. So, learning how to create a positive candidate experience. And that comes with a well thought out process. So, what is the objective? What aids someone in performing well? What previous experience or soft skills do I need to have understanding of to execute this? Google is your best friend. Chat GPT is another good buddy to take along the journey as well, because it can give you some insight to industry analysis, salary bands. I'm just thinking of things initially if you don't have a robust TA program that can really help you. So it can give you some examples of job descriptions. You have examples of salary ranges based on level and competency of particular roles. And there are even some interview like templates and plans on like how many levels, how many layers to tack onto an interview process to really help you drive this, because that's what's happening. If you don't have a robust TA arm, you're now the driver of recruiting for the talent that you need to execute this role, or again, this strategic goal for the org that role specifically is tied to.
Yeah, I think that is so important to highlight because you have so many organizations, so many startups where they're like, okay, we're ready to hire Miss
Absolutely.
VP of marketing. Congratulations, you get your head count, go for it. And this might be a newer leader who might be the only one leading marketing. So they have never hired before. Maybe they haven't like really done it in a robust way. And they're tasked with this, like, it's like they're getting what they want. But I don't know that a lot of people realize how much work it actually is to do it
To
successfully.
recruit.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a big lift behind the scenes. Typically, what we see front facing is a calendar invite to a Zoom, a beautiful job description, and you answer some interview questions and you move on through process. But what really is taking place behind the scenes is a very comprehensive, deep analysis on things like pay equity, pay transparency, making sure salary bands are fair and equitable, making
Mhm.
sure the articulation of your job description really meets the needs of the role in the business. And again, if a person was handed said job description, they'd have understanding of the particular role. You behind the scenes are fact checking your bias or making sure that you maintain complete objectivity when you're assessing talent, making sure that maybe you involve other key stakeholders so that the decision isn't on just one perspective. I think I'm a phenomenal recruiter and I have an ability to find amazing talent. I would never lend myself to only being the decision maker at the table when it comes to assessing talent. So a lot of those things are behind the scenes moving pieces. And even again, what we offer, how we even articulate in written language. Here's what your total package looks like. That is a heavy lift that most talent and even at times hiring managers, because they don't play that role in the TA space, don't see. This is at times months and months of fine tuning, of preparation, of rewriting, of several meetings, and again, layers upon layers to make sure that this is a great recruitment experience as well as a quality candidate experience overall. So there's a lot that goes into it.
I'm hearing some calls to action bubble out from that because this scenario is so common. And I think it can create such a terrible hiring experience if you don't go through this process. So I'm hearing that first and foremost, it is a process. And I think so many jump into it and just do the job description, figure out like the limited research on the salary bands and start interviewing when in reality that actually can be very harmful. So I'm hearing slow down and think about
Yeah.
the process. And I'm also wondering your stance on training for individuals that don't have, say, okay, if you're not going to have a talent acquisition role and you are planning to hire, these hiring managers need training to understand this process.
Tons. I am such an advocate and cheerleader for managerial training because oftentimes, again, people say, I don't leave orgs, I leave managers.
Mhm.
And on the recruiting end, at times you're not picking an org, you're picking a leader, someone that I really believe in, someone that I can stand behind, someone that I can lock arms in and drive this initiative and work. with that totality of responsibility, when you think of the managerial lift, then to me, you owe yourself the true due diligence to constantly check bias, to fine tune process, and to constantly seek training and education. Our HR policies and laws and regulations are oftentimes changing.
Mm.
The talent market is changing based on generational nuances. So, again, what lands a Gen Y versus a Gen X versus the millennials will show up very differently. So, you always have to not only be well versed in your particular career vertical and the team that you're driving, you need to have some blanket information across HR policies. And you need to understand some market trends, some changes and things that are emerging from technology to well as age demographics, what's happening societally, what is happening government wise. These things bleed in to how we, of course, attract, recruit, and retain talent.
Yes, that's huge. And I think that people, hopefully, by hearing all of this, can see the pattern that we get into without doing this work, how we just end up hiring people that are like ourselves.
Absolutely, because we have a bias. And I want us to stop running from it. We all have them and to levels of degrees. And it's based on our own lived experience, our own perceptions, our own behaviors, our own opinions at times. And to me, accepting it first helps you then check it.
Yeah.
If you haven't accepted something, how do you check it? How do you shape shift it? So be
Yeah.
open to that. Have a level of acceptance of saying, yeah, I do have some biases, but let me make sure that they don't show up into recruiting talent where I may miss on a dynamic opportunity to bring someone in with a different lived experience, a different diversity of thought that could really expand my department, that could really align with meeting some of these audacious goals for the org.
Yeah, that reflection that leads to the awareness that then you can, okay, I can take action on this and change my behaviors.
And thank you for saying that, because I think that so much of what is going to move forward into corporate climate and what is going to be a key change maker for orgs and even talent is having managers who have strong self-awareness.
I absolutely agree with you. Absolutely. And the thing about self awareness, too, is there are tools that can help you see and people that can help you see your blind spots. But as you said, you really do have to accept it. You are the only one that can actually change the way that you show up. Hundreds of people could be like saying it to your face, and you still might not see it or accept it. So you have to go through that process. Okay, so I'm thinking about just on this same thread, like companies will go on these like hiring sprees and maybe they don't have these
Mhm.
processes in place. So then it's like this like one-time spike of, okay, we did this hiring thing. And then maybe a year later, okay, we did this hiring thing, which is completely unsustainable. So what are your recommendations? And I heard some things come out, but what are your recommendations to make sure that these talent acquisition strategies are sustainable and adaptable for that long-term success?
They need to be consistent. So if I am interviewing for a product role or marketing role, let's say 6 months down the line, those two new hires connect and say, hey, tell me about your candidate experience and when you were interviewing for this role. The experiences need to show up very similar. Candidate A can't say, oh, I had 2 interviews and they extended an offer. And then candidate B is, oh, I had to go through 7 rounds of interviews before I got that. And realize, again, audience, I know that there's nuance to that depending on the level,
Right.
the managerial lift, what this person will be charged with. I know that we have to have some flexibility within process to account for those things. But again, maintain some consistency. Also have some flexibility built into your process where you can either scale it up, again, for those higher level roles, or scale it down for some of those more entry level positions in your org. I think that you need to be able to provide metrics. I think things need to be documented. consistently and often. And again, do some analysis work to say, are these processes driving our initial objective or outcome? So if you are building a recruitment process from the lens of not just hiring, but also retention, to say, hey, I want a process that not only gets me the ideal candidate persona, but I want someone to stay. I want someone to grow. So run some trend analysis behind the scenes to say, okay, did this process aid in us decreasing retention? Did this process aid in us being able to accelerate or increase internal movement or mobility? Because I think that's also part of the story that's often overlooked in the TA space is recruit, and refining talent and refilling roles. But I like for orgs to think beyond the today and start planning for tomorrow. Because also, again, candidate experience that I draw back to, because I like leveraging both sides as a recruiter, is what value am I offering you today and tomorrow? And how impactful would it be to see an opportunity and I'm sharing you this pathway to success, this vertical or even lateral progression that you can see within this organization, within this team, to be able to actually have those results, to have that storytelling, to have an effective process that not just leads to impactful today outcome of, again, the role being filled, but being able to look at talent and say they've been hired 2, 3, promoted 2 or 3 additional times beyond what they were initially hired for. And I think those are some of the goals that now TA as well as orgs need to start aligning with, not just hiring today, but hire today, promote tomorrow.
Yeah, I think retention is a huge part of this. And I'm glad you brought that up. And I think that it speaks volumes for the culture, the process, the people. Like it really does. If you see somebody, if you see an org where the tenure is quite long, you're wondering, gosh, they really love this. Somebody must be doing something right. I'm thinking on the opposite end of that, because I think that sometimes hiring managers tend to experience this. And then the orgs are scratching their head around high employee churn rate. What are some of the top reasons that people do leave?
So again, back to what I said, people don't leave orgs, they leave managers. And I feel like I'm always pointing a finger. I make managers responsible for so much, but it's a service role. And you have to go into it thinking that I am here to serve this team. I'm here to serve individual contributors. So again, is the work meaningful? Is the feedback impactful? Am I consistent with my behaviors? If I say, hey, we meet bi-weekly to discuss your development and your progression, am I holding my end of the bargain, or am I constantly rescheduling? Am I offering you true quantitative, objective insight to how I assess and view your performance? And how do I have a true expansion of thought conversation that's just beyond the weekly check-in to say, okay, here's the weekly deliverable. You did it. All right. Have a good week. Off to the races. So I think how you really reduce that is definitely going into it. I'm here to serve, being consistent, offering quantitative, objective feedback. And again, constantly training yourself just because you got there. So now you're the director. Now you're the VP. Does not mean that your learning stops. And I think some of the most impactful, passionate leaders are always learners at the table. They are not always in teaching capacity. You have to be open to that. And it's okay to admit blind spots. It's okay to admit ignorance at times. And those are conversations that us as leaders aren't always forthcoming with, but always be open to learning.
I'll admit that was a leading question because you knew I wanted to go there. This podcast is all about leadership, right? And that is where we see a huge gap. Where we see a huge gap is that developing self as a leader, because we skip that. We go straight into individual contributor to trying to lead others and trying to lead org, but we don't spend enough time developing ourselves as leaders. And so then you don't get the most effective recruitment process, hiring
Mhm.
process, candidate experience, employee experience, and then they leave. And yeah, I'm glad it's worth repeating. So I'm glad you went there.
Yes, and be open to going back to the basics. So that's something that we've rolled out here, Open Sesame, that I love to highlight and share is that we offer managerial 101. So even for us as an org, for us as a HR function, we are not assumptive in believing that you've been enrolled and you know all the things and you're good. Let's like dial it all the way back to the beginning and say, let's cover some of these nuances that impact how you show up as a manager and how you effectively lead teams. If orgs, TA, HR functions are open to integrating not just that advance and that upskilling, but dial it back and go back to some of those basics, some of those general topics that are times overlooked, but they're really impactful.
Yes, great call out. And I think, again, I'm thinking about too for orgs that don't have that function, which, again, you're probably going to get from this the call to action of that might not be sustainable or effective
Mhm.
to not have a supporting function like that. But if you don't, what's your strategy? Like you have to be thinking about these things.
Absolutely.
I want to dig in a little bit to talking about DEI strategies. And I
Yeah.
wonder too, there's so many different acronyms for that. Like I've leaned into more of the JEDI
Mhm.
acronym, but I'm curious, what do you use? What do you think is appropriate in the way that we're evolving in the workplace and talking about DEI?
I think it's beyond the language and it's more of the behavior that we attach to this work. And a lot of orgs, a lot of leaders are looking at this as a line item. They check it off and they're off to the races to explore something else. Realize that DI is so much deeper than a checkbox. It is our lived experiences that have gotten us to where we are, that at
Mhm.
times aid us to where we're going, at times can be a hindrance and a roadblock to some of the audacious things that we desire for ourselves. So, really putting some true feeling, and we don't always like talking about that in business, but there's some feeling, there's some impact there. So, I'd love to see just more expansion beyond quantifying it or checkboxing it.
Yeah, I love that. And I love asking people, like, what do you think DEI is? And that's why I even ask.
Exactly.
It totally goes beyond the different acronyms. But if I'm speaking to somebody and I say JEDI instead of DEI, they're going to ask me, what does that mean? And it gives me a chance to explain, you know, that we're incorporating justice in this as well. Like we're
Mhm.
thinking about restorative justice, we're thinking about things from that standpoint in addition. And so I sometimes just want people to really lean into, okay, when you say DEI, what's included in that? What are you thinking about? Are you thinking about belonging? Are you thinking about justice, a restorative justice? And yeah, so I'm always just leaning into the language that will spark that deeper thinking that I think that you're referencing.
Absolutely. It's destroying systems.
Hmm.
And you have to go into an understanding that some of this framework that we have normalized is impacting other marginalized groups. And when you're saying, I am driving DEI strategy, what you're actually saying is, I am here to disassemble systems and to restructure behaviors. And I don't know if people always take on that. And I think once you get into the thick of it, you realize, oh, this isn't just a strategic outcome. This is some true
Hmm.
heavy lifting.
That's a mic drop moment for me. And yeah, especially just as a Black woman, right?
Mhm.
We, as Black women, we understand that it is really looking at the systems and disassembling them and questioning them. And instead of the people, like we tend to get caught up in the people when it's no, let's look at oppressive systems. Let's look at destructive systems. Let's look at these that are driving the behaviors, that are driving the biases. And so I think you're totally right. There's a lot of people that don't fully understand that. It also reminds me of something that I just saw about decolonization and even like abolition too. This question of what did y'all think decolonization meant, when you start to see the breakdown and it's what did you think that we meant by that? So I love that statement. Okay, so I'm curious, how do we, and I think that you went there a little bit, but just to make it crystal clear for people, what should leaders be doing to ensure that these strategies are A, authentic and B, effective?
I think, again, back to my initial statement, realize that this is beyond a checkbox. Realize this is beyond analytics, that you are talking about human beings and the totality of their lived experience as we see it in current societal climate. I think it's also, again, always educating and training. I think it's uncovering the biases. How do you, of course, identify them? How do you train beyond them? And then some key HR pieces that I like to tie in to this to make sure that you're headed down the right pathway. Be open to feedback. Have employee surveys, conduct these on a regular, consistent basis so that you can gauge what the actual experience of your DEI strategies are. So you can implement them, but how are they being perceived? How are they being lived out on a day-to-day basis is really important. Take a look at your retention and your turnover rates. Analyze that. See what different demographic groups, what stories are being told from a quantitative approach. And not looking at just the bad numbers, look at your promotion and your advancement numbers. See who is represented within those categories, because it can either signal that we have really made an impactful cultural shift into really encompassing DI, or we haven't, and there's still additional work that needs to be done. Because I think orgs have really championed behind a DI strategy from the lens that let's recruit for diversity. Diversity creates really dynamic outcomes from an organization. But I think the next layer beyond that is advancement and promotional opportunities. How do you make that talent ready? How do you encourage them? How do you develop them? And then again, how do I remove barriers so that you are on a true, organic, natural pathway to success?
And I think that kind of brings in those other areas of like belonging, inclusion, or once
Absolutely.
somebody's in the door, right? How does that look? If they're offered a promotion, are they taking it? Are they feeling good about it? What do the different groups within the organization look like where they can go and feel that belonging and inclusion? So I think that's a great point. You hit on something that I actually was going to ask about, so that's great. You touched a little
Okay.
bit on measurement of
Yes.
some of these strategies. So thinking about, okay, what does the data say when we go
Mhm.
and we see who's being promoted, who's not being promoted? What are other, or what would you suggest we look at when it comes to measuring the impact of these strategies?
I even want you to explore some exit interview feedback. I think that some of the biggest game changing elements for most orgs is asking folks, why did you leave? Why did you depart from us? And really seeing if there's any DEI related issues within that storytelling. I think the other thing that's really helpful to get out of your silo of your org is do some benchmarking. Compare yourself to other organizations within your industries. Where are you showing up? Where do you stack when it comes to some of these DEI metrics and initiatives? Are key things that you need to be observing to really help quantify this and again lead that charge to change behavior.
Yeah, great suggestions. When you think of DEI and
Mhm.
think about an organization that's doing it really well, is there any org that stands out to you?
I can't help but say and highlight Open Sesame. I think that we've made some really dynamic changes. Specifically, I'd like to call out the gender diversification amongst our executive leadership. We know that C suite oftentimes lends itself to male talent.
Mhm.
To see that Open Sesame has multiple female leaders in our C suite, I think brings upon a great diversification. And I believe that it gives you that line of sight that all are welcome at this table. So I really love that specific change that I've seen.
Yeah, love that. Okay, so we're going to switch gears a little bit. And I was telling Kristina that I have, I used to play this game on the podcast called Lead or Leave. And it was super fun. Don't worry, we'll play it again one day. But I like novelty. I get bored of things very fast. So I had to switch it up and I stopped doing it for a while, but I missed the game. I want to play the game. So now what I'm doing is I am having ChatGPT create a game for us, for each guest, a new game each time. And I don't really know what it's going to be. I know the name of it right now, but essentially we're just going to go into it. Bear with us because it might be funny. It might be like, who knows? We're going to roll with it though. So the game we are playing is hire, fire, or inspire. You're going to decide. I'm going to give you a scenario, and you're going to decide whether you would hire, fire, or inspire the individual in that situation, providing reasoning there. It's a little bit spicy.
Yes.
Okay, are we ready for the first scenario?
I hope so. Let's give it a try.
Okay. This is going to be so interesting. This first one's called The Talented Disturber.
Okay.
An incredibly skilled individual constantly delivers top-notch results, but sows discord in the team with a challenging attitude and disregard for harmony.
So would I hire, fire, or inspire this person? I would say I would lend on to inspiration. I would acknowledge their amazing attributes and their ability to drive for performance, but I'd lean in and have a conversation and realize the tonality, the approach, and how they're choosing to show up in meetings. What's the impact? And I think sometimes we need to have that intentional conversation of intent versus impact. And oftentimes we separate the two. So your intentions may be all well and good. You believe in being transparent. You believe in being honest. The impact is you're leaving this team very disengaged, very disgruntled, and they're not motivated to drive for results. So how do we make sure that your intent and your impact are mirroring one another?
I am obsessed with that thought. And I think it's a really great notion for leaders to think about, and also people who are being managed, because you can get into positions where you're like, oh, but this leader I like the way that they talk. They say that they're a servant leader. They say all these really great things that I totally agree with. But then we're stuck in these moments where that's not actually how they act. And so I think it's really good for both sides. Yeah, love that answer. Okay, here's another one. I have a feeling these are all going to be like, I don't think that these are grounds for firing, but okay, check. This one's called The Complacent Genius. A veteran team member who once was a key innovator has become complacent, no longer pushing boundaries, but still delivering stable, reliable work. Hire, fire, or inspire.
Oh, that one's a tough one because I'm like, I could argue too. So I'll share perspective. Fire from the lens of maybe this journey has come to an end. We don't like hearing that. And maybe they need to be completely immersed in something completely new and supporting their exit so that they can go and be effective elsewhere. I could also argue from the lens of a managerial lift of offering some encouragement and some inspiration of why is there this stagnation? Why is there this sense of complacency that's showing up? Is this not meaningful, impactful work? What other additional projects or cross collaboration could I offer you to explore expansion of thought and behavior? So I could argue both sides on exiting that person and then at times offering them some support and encouragement to inspire them.
I like that a lot. And I feel like a lot of these where maybe it's like you start with that inspiration, right? And I've gotten this in coaching too, where it's I have this employee, I want to put them on a PIP. They're not blah, blah, blah. And what we uncover is that there was never a conversation. There was never that moment of coaching and inspiring. And maybe if we started there, and then uncovered what the next step was instead of jumping to pip or fire, whatever it may be. It creates a much more effective and I think collaborative discussion around what's going on.
And even with that particular scenario, I pause really quick to also let's realize that so much of us isn't just always 100% work. There are some interpersonal outside of professional persona that are often at play. So there could be something that's eating your energy, that's maximizing your mental fortitude, that is of sensitive nature, that is of utter importance. And maybe it's causing that shape shift in how you're showing up. Again, back to how I show up as a leader, remembering to be human. Remember, you're leading other humans and not robots. So there are times sensitive things or personal things that are causing how we show up. So look beyond the veil, do some additional digging there.
Yes, I love that. Look beyond. Okay, let's do one more. I was trying to get a controversial one, but it didn't do a very good job at doing that. But it did give me an interesting scenario, which I'll read and we can just decide what you would do. This one's
Okay.
so weird, but it's called the unseen sacrifice. Sadly, I've actually seen this happen before. I think it's very rare, but an employee has been quietly using personal funds to bolster company projects, ensuring the success, but
Oh.
consequently facing significant financial strain, obviously. Other team members are unaware, and the project's successes are collectively celebrated. The employee approaches leadership, revealing their secret financial contributions, expressing regret, and now needing financial help due to the accrued personal debt.
Wow.
First of all, don't do this.
I was going to say, please, don't ever do that. Don't be that person. Do not offer any personal finances to support any corporate initiatives or projects. I don't know if hire, fire, inspiration would fit the category of this scenario, other than please, I implore you not to do that. And even beyond just the financial expense, let's take a look at the behavior aspect of this scenario. And I implore you to work on professional boundaries, knowing when you're maxed out, knowing when you've reached your limits, knowing when you've stretched yourself beyond capacity, because it bleeds into other areas and how you show up, again, how you look and are seen and valued and evaluated for future opportunities. And I think it's very important for us early on within leadership functions and roles and responsibilities to develop some healthy, sustainable behaviors. So again, ask yourself, I'm stretching and I'm moving and I'm doing and I'm going, right? How long can I keep that up? And I always stop with myself. And I believe at times it's great to aim for the stars, to obtain some of those audacious goals, to go beyond maybe your own perceived limits, but don't consistently stay there because your tank is going to quickly be on E. So maintain some consistent behavior, some ways that are very authentic and true to how you're able to maintain and show up on a consistent basis. And again, have some boundaries. Know when I need to go and refill the cup so that I can be impactful and effective.
See, I knew you would have a great perspective on that one, even if it didn't really fit the game.
Right.
Yeah, but honestly, like I have seen this happen before, and the actions that are taken, okay, we're going to reimburse you, don't. But I think where you just took that is it goes back to that self development, right?
Is.
Like why? What is the fear around this? Like, if you didn't do this, what are you scared of? And really exploring that, because yeah, we got to get to the root of that issue of what is driving your decision to do that and to put yourself in that detrimental position. Thanks for playing. We never know. We never know how that game is, whatever ChatGPT is going to spit out at us, but that's the fun in it. And I think also I love these games because it showcases the ability to adapt, right? Like you don't know what's coming. And as a leader, if you were in that situation, like you have to showcase how you would adapt, like what you would do, what muscles you would flex. We're getting to the end of our time, and this has
Aw.
been such a great conversation. I know I could have 10 pages of questions to ask you, and we would have the best conversation. So
I
we'll
think
have
so.
to do it again. But I'm curious, what is a leadership topic? And it's okay if it's something that you already mentioned, but a leadership topic that you think a lot of people shy away from, but it really should be more openly discussed.
So I use some therapy jargon in there around boundaries, around knowing your tank and when you need to be refilled. I think that we do not talk about mental health enough and how it shows up in the workplace. And I think that as leaders, you always want to be that guiding light, that resource, that thing to look at and be inspiring to those that you are managing. But I encourage us to have conversations around our mental health, around our exhaustions, around our pitfalls, around our overall well being. And I even implore you not to just get on your quote unquote soapbox and it comes into this complaining saga and this woe is me moment, but talk about it in a way of self discovery, talk about it in a prioritizing of mental health. Talk about it from the lens of self care. So, what do I do to make sure that my mental health is of true priority to me? So if you have that willingness to be open and say, oh, I go to therapy, that might encourage a team member and someone that may be falling on the wayside and you're seeing trends and disruptive patterns in behavior performance. That little nugget might encourage them to seek some tools for themselves. Telling folks, oh, I go for a walk, telling folks that I journal or I read a book or I do a guided meditation. I just don't think that we are sharing enough about all the 360 holistic things that are needed for us to perform professionally, personally, and just living and navigating this thing we call life. So share more.
You must know that's one of my favorite topics.
Oh,
I
we can
mean,
talk forever.
yeah, for sure. And I think what we're realizing is we don't have these separate circles, right?
Yeah.
Everything intersects. And then in each of these areas, there is a level of support that you can get from different areas of your life. And work is not excluded from that. And I'm also hearing from you, lead by example
Yeah.
on this topic, lead by example and talk about it and create a space where others feel safe to talk about it as well. And yeah, I completely agree with you. And that is definitely where I like to sit as a coach, is like in between that like personal, professional development. But then also, I think what's so important is as an individual, understanding the different levels of support and what's appropriate and what you need at that time. Because like coaching, it intersects with therapy so much, but there's a line. There's a
Mhm.
distinction, and you have to know what you need as well as an individual.
Absolutely.
Do I need a coach? Do I need a therapist? Do I need a leader who's going to inspire me? Maybe it's all three, but knowing that you have agency over that choice and that there is a distinction, I think is really important.
And it goes back to, again, what we talked about earlier, a level of self-awareness.
Yes, and education for sure. Okay, awesome. What experiences or exercises or resources would you recommend for emerging leaders out there to just enhance their both personal and professional growth?
Get a coach. So,
Yes.
yes, hello. I believe in leadership, executive coaching, knowing how to show up, how to articulate, how to drive for performance, how to get to those next steps in your own career vertical. I also really advise early on, because it was a disservice to myself that I didn't start interacting with until kind of midpoint in my career. Seek out mentorship and guidance. And you need to do some fact checking. That person needs to be inspirational to you. So something that you're at times often looking up to. Hey, I'm trying to get to where you've already been. I think it needs to be a great level of trust within that mentorship relationship, because we can say that we're open to coaching, to feedback, but realize that it's always based on the who.
Mm.
And you need to be able to trust that who. So when you have this mentor that's offering you some guidance, that's offering you some feedback, that you have this openness to receiving it. So you're receptive to that coaching and to that feedback, and then able to approach it very strategically on how do I make these changes for myself. So the inspiration and the trust are key components to that mentorship relationship and the quality of it and how it really advances. And you need to have someone that is not just mentoring you behind the scenes, because that's also the piece. You have those, right? They'll work with you and coach you and help develop you, but you need someone that's also your cheerleader, that's going to mention your name in rooms that you're not in attendance of,
Mm,
i.e., why I'm here. Thank you, Tracy.
yes, sponsors. And yeah, that difference between mentors and sponsors and knowing like who can be both. Having a mentor who's also a sponsor is amazing.
Absolutely.
But I wanted to say that fantastic advice. And I appreciate you going beyond the standard get a mentor advice, because a lot of people are like, okay, get a mentor. And then it's, but what does that really mean?
Some
What does that,
behaviors that you
yes.
should be looking for in that mentorship person. How do they really show up? And are they authentic? Are they humans?
Yes.
If you wanted to duplicate some of their behaviors, would that feel good to you?
Great question. I love it. Kristina, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I cannot wait to connect with you again, and I'm sure we'll find other ways to partner in the
Absolutely.
future. But I just so appreciate you coming on and being real and sharing your insights and great advice for all of the leaders out there. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. I hope you walk away with something empowering that you can take into your own leadership journey. Are you a high-performing executive looking to take your career to the next level? Or maybe you're an emerging leader who wants to develop the skills you need to advance in your role and show up authentically. Or maybe you're experiencing burnout and struggling to find a better work-life balance. Whatever your situation is, one-on-one coaching can help you achieve your personal and professional goals. If you're interested in experiencing the power of coaching for yourself, head on over to hypehousecoaching.com/start coaching now, where you can set up a one-on-one leadership and executive coaching intro session for free. Remember, the only hype that really matters is the hype within.